I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
Prince Harry had endured silence, rejection, and years of distance. But he had never believed every path back could be destroyed in a single morning. Then King Charles placed his signature beneath a private royal order designed to make reconciliation possible, but restoration impossible. When the sealed decision reached Harry, he read the first page twice, gripped the edge of the table, and realized his father had not merely closed one door. He had sealed the entire corridor. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the room had become too quiet. Inside his private study at Windsor Castle, the king faced a folder as Prince William and the private secretary waited. The Royal Restoration Closure Order was a binding palace directive, meaning it set the limits of Harry's future role and told the royal household how to enforce them. It ended every route back to working royal life. Military appointments, official representation, palace-backed security, a formal residence, and any part-time position within the monarchy. Charles reached for the pen, then stopped. His hand remained above the signature line long enough for William to notice, and the future king watched his father struggle between private love and duty. Music, a return without boundaries, could blur who spoke for the crown, while another compromise could drag the family back into the same cycle of pressure and public conflict. Yet the name on the page was still his son's. Harry received the secured copy in California through his legal representative. Meghan stood nearby as confusion left his face and disbelief took its place. He read the clause stating that no private family agreement could overturn the order, then looked up in disbelief. The document did not remove him from the family or deny his blood connection to Charles. It did something colder. Music. It separated being the king's son from ever again serving the crown. Charles added one final handwritten instruction. No palace official, future private secretary, household committee, or royal intermediary could reopen restoration talks unless the sovereign and direct heir agreed together. The sovereign meant the reigning monarch, while the direct heir was next in line to inherit the throne. That condition made William essential to any reversal. Music. Charles finished signing, placed the pen beside the folder, and said quietly, "No more uncertainty." William gave no answer. He closed the cover over Harry's name, and the younger brother's last hope disappeared. Harry's shock was immediate, but the deeper wound came from discovering that his father had not acted alone, and that William's role was far more personal than the document revealed. Behind the royal language, legal clauses, and sealed instructions stood two brothers who had once walked behind the same coffin and promised, music, never to abandon one another. Now, William was protecting the institution Harry believed had failed him, while Harry was fighting for a place William believed could no longer exist. Charles stood between them, not simply as king, but as a father, forced to decide which bond could survive without endangering the crown. Harry did not see restoration as a return to ceremonies, uniforms, or palace balconies. He saw it as proof that leaving Britain had not erased his place in public life. He wanted purpose, recognition, and some path back to service. A working royal was a family member who carried out official duties on behalf of the monarch, and losing that role had left him feeling separated from both country and identity. William saw the same question through a colder lens. As heir, the person next in line to the throne, he believed a partial return would create two versions of Harry at once. A private man speaking freely and a royal figure whose words could still be mistaken for the crown's position. Every appearance could trigger another argument. Every interview could reopen old wounds. Stability demanded a clear line, even if drawing it meant hurting his brother. Harry stared at the final page while Meghan stood beside the kitchen table. Her hand moved toward his, but he pulled away. Not from anger, but because his eyes were fixed on William's approval mark. Palace resistance had been expected. Music, his brother's support had not. The future king had helped shape language designed to survive beyond Charles's reign, and that betrayal cut deeper than the loss of any title. Meghan watched him reread one sentence. Family reconciliation shall not create constitutional expectation. Constitutional expectation meant the belief that a private family reunion could lead to an official royal role. Music. To Harry, the words made affection feel weak and conditional. His father might welcome him as a son, yet the monarchy would still reject him as a prince with purpose. Charles carried the guilt in silence. The king remembered the frightened boy who had once needed protection, but he could not ignore the adult years of public accusations, damaged trust, and private talks that became fresh disputes. He loved both sons, yet every attempt to hold them together seemed to pull the crown further apart. Catherine confronted William privately that evening. Music, she asked whether permanence was truly necessary. He answered that uncertainty had already harmed everyone, but his controlled voice betrayed the cost. Later, the prince paused alone outside his children's rooms, knowing, music, that protecting George's future may have ended Harry's royal one. Harry then began searching through old messages. Buried among them was a private promise Charles had made during an earlier family crisis, a promise that seemed to clash directly with the new order. Yet the decision had not begun with advisors or William's fears. It began with one explosive incident that convinced Charles the restoration question had become too dangerous to leave unresolved. The final order appeared sudden, but its true beginning lay months earlier inside a private room at Balmoral. That evening, Harry was offered a narrow path toward family reconciliation under strict confidentiality. By midnight, the meeting had collapsed. William had walked out, and Charles had been left staring at an empty chair. One sentence spoken during that confrontation convinced the king that every future offer could become another battlefield, and that uncertainty itself had become a threat to the monarchy. Charles had authorized the talks in secret, music, because he still believed the family could be repaired before the damage became permanent. Music. Harry would attend selected private occasions without carrying out official duties, making speeches, or representing the crown. The arrangement was meant to rebuild personal trust first. Music. A working royal was someone who performed formal duties for the monarch, and the proposal carefully avoided suggesting that family contact would restore that position. Harry entered the Balmoral library, meeting expecting more. The fictional gathering had been arranged with no cameras, no public statement, and no commercial use of anything discussed. Charles believed those limits would protect everyone. William believed they were the only reason the meeting could happen at all. Yet, the younger brother soon demanded written confirmation that successful reconciliation would eventually lead to a Commonwealth role and restored ceremonial military status. William refused immediately. A Commonwealth role meant officially representing the monarch across a voluntary association of nations. Music, while ceremonial military status carried symbolic links to regiments without active command. The prince said family contact could not be traded for constitutional rewards. Harry heard punishment in those words. He accused his brother of using the monarchy's future to control his own, and the future king pushed his chair backward with a sharp scrape. Harry turned toward Charles before the room could settle. "If you leave my future to William, you have already chosen." The king recoiled. He heard more than anger. He heard a warning that every private act of affection might become pressure for an official concession. Charles tried to calm both sons, but William walked out, and Harry followed moments later without touching the tea placed before him. Morning brought the final blow. Music. An overseas entertainment report published details closely resembling the private proposal, including the limits on appearances and the possibility of future talks. The source was never publicly identified, but a documented palace account recorded how quickly confidence collapsed. Harry later insisted through a recorded conversation with his legal representative that he had not authorized the leak. Inside the household, however, the damage had already been done. Charles remained alone in the library after both sons had gone. He lifted Harry's untouched cup, felt that it had gone cold, and quietly ordered an aide to cancel the next morning's family breakfast. Then he instructed advisors, music, to examine whether reconciliation could be separated permanently from restoration. Their answer became the foundation of the order. Balmoral destroyed the last fragile experiment in trust. Music. But the real emotional explosion came when Harry demanded to hear the verdict directly from the father who had signed it. Harry refused to let a sealed document become his father's final word. Within hours, he demanded a private call with no lawyers, no quarters, and no carefully prepared statements. Charles agreed, but only after insisting that William would not join them. What followed was not a constitutional discussion. It was a collision between a son who believed he was being erased and a father who believed love could no longer be allowed to overrule consequence. Harry contacted the king through a protected family channel and rejected the private secretary's offer of a written explanation. A private secretary is the senior aide who manages the monarch's official business and sensitive communication. The younger prince refused another carefully worded palace message. He wanted Charles, not the institution. He wanted a father's answer, spoken without advisors shaping every sentence. Charles took the call inside a small sitting room at Windsor and dismissed every aide. He removed his glasses, placed the order beside him, and waited through several heavy seconds before Harry finally spoke. The silence mattered because neither man could hide behind ceremony now. One wanted recognition. The other believed repeated compromise would only deepen the damage. Harry asked whether the king intended him to spend the rest of his life as a prince without a country. Music. Charles answered that his son had chosen an independent life. But the monarchy could not keep reorganizing itself around his changing relationship with it. The crown, meaning the monarch's official authority and duties, music, required clear boundaries. Without them, every reunion could become another demand for status. Harry's anger sharpened. He accused his father of giving William control over whether he could ever return. Charles corrected him at once. The future king had advised the crown, but the signature belonged to the monarch. So did the responsibility. Then the king disclosed something Harry had never expected to hear. Palace officials had documented 7 separate attempts by his representatives to connect private reconciliation with security, residence, ceremonial participation, or official status. Harry denied that those conversations were demands. He said advisors had twisted exploratory discussions into evidence against him. Charles reached for a confidential communication and read one sentence aloud from the documented account. Harry's team had described renewed family access as the first stage of institutional re-entry. Institutional re-entry meant using private contact, music, as a path back into official royal life. Harry rose so quickly that his chair crashed backward. Charles heard the impact across the distance, but did not move. "Do you still want me as your son?" the younger man demanded. The king closed his eyes. That was never the question. Charles then delivered the final blow. The order protected not only William's reign, but George's future. When the call ended, Camilla entered and found him gripping the arm of his chair. The queen consort heard him insist the decision was necessary, but his voice broke on the word. The confrontation exposed the family wound. Yet the force making the order permanent came from a colder calculation, one centered on William, George, and the survival of undivided royal authority. Charles carried the emotional burden, but William held the argument that made reversal almost impossible. For the heir, Harry's return was not merely a family matter. It threatened to create 2 competing royal centers, one inside the monarchy and one operating beyond its control. Yet when William was finally asked to approve the permanent clause, he did not sign immediately. He walked to the window, looked across Windsor, and faced the cost of making his brother's exile irreversible. William had received the same warning from several advisors. A part-time arrangement would blur responsibility because every speech, interview, charity campaign, or commercial project involving Harry might be mistaken for royal approval. The heir was the person next in line to the throne, and that position forced him to think beyond one reunion. He had to consider how confusion now could weaken authority later. The prince feared precedent.